In this video, we'll cover the basic configuration of NGINX. So let's dive into the nginx.conf file, which is the main configuration file for NGINX. You'll typically find this in etc/nginx on most Linux distributions. Here's a quick overview of how it's structured. We first have what's called global settings. This is where you set up configurations that affect the entire NGINX server. Things like user privileges, number of workers, rate limiting settings, etc. Compression, cache, all of that. Next is the events block. This section is all about managing connections and threading. It controls things like the worker connections and event model and even connection processing. Don't worry, we'll go over all of this later on. And then we have the HTTP block. This is where you handle everything related to web traffic. It includes server blocks, which are like virtual hosts, along with settings for HTTP optimizations and security rules. Don't worry about looking at all this and not knowing what all this means. We'll go over this later on. And last, we have possibly the most important block, which is called the server block. This is the key part of NGINX. This is where you define how NGINX should respond to requests for different domains or subdomains. So understanding this block right here is essential to configuring NGINX effectively. Let's take a look at what a typical nginx.conf file might look like. Here's an example. So we have here those HTTP settings that we talked about, the events block, and the global settings at the top. This might or might not look the same depending on what distribution you have. But again, this is just an example. And now let's dig deeper into this. Let's break down what each of these mean. So the first one we have here is the user. This line specifies the user that NGINX runs as. Basically, NGINX will run the NGINX service as that user. In this case, it's set to www-data, which is a common user for web services. So you're using Debian, Ubuntu in this case, you'll see www-data. But if you're using something like Red Hat or CentOS, the user here would probably be something like NGINX. It depends. Then we have the worker processes. Here we define the number of worker processes, and setting this to auto lets NGINX adjust the number based on the number of CPU cores available, which is really great for optimizing performance. And then we have the PID, which stands for process identifier. And this specifies the location of the PID file, which stores the process ID of the NGINX master process. We will interact a lot with this PID when we pass in signals like reloading, restarting, shutting down, etc. Next is the events block, and this controls the network connections. Basically, the amount of simultaneous connections it can handle. It ties with the worker process that we just saw, the one that we set to auto. So in order to find out the total number of max clients, we need to multiply the worker processes, right? So that's set to auto, times the worker connections here that you see. So for example, a server that has 4 cores, for example, we would time that times the worker connections, 1024, and you would get a maximum of 4,096 clients that your web server could handle at any given time. And then we have the HTTP block. This is the main block, like I said. This is where all the HTTP related configurations reside. And in this block, you can configure things like log formats, keep alive timeouts, compression, rate limiting, other global configurations. Let's talk about creating and editing server blocks. They're also known as virtual hosts. And virtual hosts are the websites you configure on a web server. These server blocks are what allow you to host multiple websites on a single server, each with its own configuration. Think of the web server as a building, and inside this building, there are many companies. These are the websites. And a single server can essentially serve one or more multiple websites in the same way that a building can house multiple companies in the same building. So when a request comes in, NGINX uses the server name or IP address to figure out which server block to use, making sure that the right website responds. Let's take a look at an example of a simple server block, and let's try to break this down a little more. Here we have the listen directive. This defines the port on which NGINX should listen to. And this can be for port 80 or 443, HTTP or HTTPS, or it could be another port. It could be something like 8080 if you ever used something like Jenkins, right? So it really depends on what port you want to listen to. But for the most part, if you're serving traffic to the public, you want to use 80 for unsecure or unencrypted traffic, or 443 for encrypted. Then we have the server name, and this is important because it handles the domain or subdomain in the name of the website users would type in their browser to reach your website. If you had more than one virtual host configured in this NGINX server, how would NGINX know what content to serve? The only way it could do that is by using this server name right here. So it's really important that you have a server name on all your configurations. Next is this root. This contains the directory for where the website's files would be. So in this case, it's /bar/www/example.com. And this is really with the default directory where Debian-based distributions would store it. But if you're using something like Red Hat or CentOS, it might say /usr/share/nginx/HTML. It really depends on what distribution you're using, but you can always find out the root default directory by having a look at the nginx.conf configuration files. And then we have this location block, and the / here represents the landing of the page. It's often called the root of the domain. In this example, it's example.com, right? So when you're landing on example.com, that's what that location block is doing. That location / directive, that's what it means essentially. It's when you land on example.com. And then below that, you can see that we had this try files. It's got a $URI space $URI /. And this, we'll talk more about the NGINX built-in variables, but this checks basically if the file that you're looking for or the directory exists, and if there's anything that comes after that, like / images or something like that, for example, foo or foo bar. And if it can't find anything, then you're going to get basically a 404 not found. We'll talk more about status codes later on. But when I look at this configuration, the first thing I see is it's going to land on example.com, and it's going to try to find files. Now, below that root directory, you see that it has this index and index.html. That try files will look for those files in that root directory. And if it can't find them, it will give you a 404. But inside of this example.com directory, there could be other folders, and that try files directive here will try to find files that you're requesting. And if it can't find them, it will spit out a 404. Again, we'll talk more about that a little bit later on. So NGINX has dozens of modules, and each one of these modules has dozens of arguments and directive options. The HTTP core module, for example, has dozens of directives, including the server directive that we just talked about, which is in there. It might not be in the screenshot, but it's in there. We are definitely not going to go over every single thing. There's just not enough time. And there's a lot of modules, so it really depends on what you're trying to do. All right, so now let's dig into the NGINX directory structure. And the key configuration files you'll be working with here, first up is we have this nginx.conf file. This is universal across any distribution. It'll always be in the /etc/nginx/nginx.conf. And again, this is the main configuration file for NGINX. This is where most of your core settings will live. Next, we have a directory inside of that etc NGINX folder called sites available. And here you'll find the configuration files for each website or virtual host you configured. Just keep in mind that just because you have a file in there, it doesn't mean that the configuration is active. So that's where you would need the next folder, which is called etc NGINX sites enabled. In this directory, you have that symbolic link. It's also referred to as symlink to the file that is in sites available that you currently enable, I guess, in a way. If you want to use it, you want to put it first sites available, and then you will enable it, and it will add it to the sites enabled. It's a little bit different. So if you're coming from like Apache has a command, I think it's A2N site or something like that, that will enable a site. And then they also have the counter to its D site or A2D site to disable a website. I wish NGINX had something like that, but we use symbolic links to enable and disable. Now, if you want additional configuration needs, there's a folder called conf.d, and you could set up some SSL things if you want. You can also use it to set up some load balancing or just a extra directory to store extra configuration files. Now, we're not really going to use that folder through most of our demos, but I might be wrong. We might just use it. It's just not, you can store most of the configuration in all these and these three other directories. Now, when it comes to the actual website itself, they're usually stored in bar www. This is the Debian Ubuntu default, but if you're using something like Red Hat or Fedora or CentOS, it would be /usr/share/nginx, and I believe it's /HTML on the default folder. We are going to be sticking with Ubuntu throughout this whole course. We just find that Ubuntu has a very friendly approach. It's got a huge community backing. So, just FYI, we are going to be using Ubuntu. Moving on, we have this folder called MIME types. This is where you would define these different file extensions, which helps the server understand how to handle various file formats. For example, how to handle text files, JPEGs, video, audio files, etc. For processing management, we have the NGINX PID file to store that process ID that I talked about. That's what passes that signal to the NGINX master processes. And finally, we have a folder called varlog NGINX. Very, very, very important. This is where our access logs are and our error logs. And this is how we keep track of what's happening in our website. So very, very important that folder. We will be having a look at that a lot. Now let's go over some essential NGINX commands that you'll find very handy. First, we have the NGINX-H, and this gives you the help menu if you want to do a quick reference and you're not sure about what the options are. We have NGINX-V. This gives you the version of NGINX you're running. So if you're ever in support and they want to know the information, what version you're running, or you want to maybe use a module and you're not really sure if it's supported on an older version of NGINX, this is how you would find out the version you're running. And then you have the NGINX-V, and this provides the detailed build of all your configuration. So this will give you all the modules that are currently installed. It'll give you the version of NGINX. It has a much more, detail on the output than NGINX-V, which just gives you the version. Now, the NGINX-T command is probably the most important command of any of these NGINX that you're going to use. And this checks your configuration for any issues, primarily syntax issues. We all make mistakes. You can add an extra comma, you can add an extra space, you don't add the semicolon, you put something where it's not supposed to. NGINX-T will catch those. So it's crucial that you use this every time you make a change, and you'll see throughout the demos, I'm always going to use NGINX-T, because you don't want to make a change, save it, restart or reload NGINX only to find out that, you broke the configuration and you broke the website essentially. So very, very important. Then we have NGINX-T, and this is particularly helpful when you're seeking support and they want you to share the configuration. So let's say you have support, support might ask you for a whole detail of that configuration. You would use NGINX-T. NGIN-S. This is that signal to the master process. So with this, we can do a lot of things. We can stop, we can quit, we can reload, we can reopen. For example, if you wanted to stop NGINX, you could do NGINX-S for signal and then pass in the stop command. If you wanted to do the same thing with quit, reload, reopen, you're always going to use NGINX space -S space, reload, for example. And the reloading, I should mention that the reloading is much more friendly than the restart. Restart will actually, restart the NGINX service. Reload just reloads the configuration. So again, back to NGINX-T. If you want to make changes, make sure that you run NGINX-T first and then you reload. So you would do something like this. You would do sudo space NGINX-T. If you get the successful response, like here, you can see here that says syntax is okay, test successful. Now you can go ahead and reload and you should have no issues. You could also restart NGINX, right? Now I said that NGINX-S space reload is safer than restart, but there are some times when you need to restart NGINX. This is the way you can do it. You can also reload NGINX, right? This is safer than the restart. Essentially, this is systemd doing the reload as opposed to NGINX reloading its configuration. It's not the same, but it's safer than the restart. And you can also check the status of NGINX. So in this module, what I like to do is go over a hello world example. As of course, it is tradition to always start with a hello world, so why not follow the same suit and do it here as well. Now, the first thing I want to do is make sure that NGINX is installed, so I can do a sudo system ctl status NGINX. It hasn't started, or it's not started, so let's go ahead and start it. I'm going to clear this screen, and I'm going to just verify that NGINX is running by doing our curl command, curl localhost, and we can see here that NGINX is responding with the default welcome to NGINX page. Now, what we want to do here is we want to copy the same configuration that this default page is using, and we're going to modify it to our needs. I'm going to go ahead here and clear the screen, and I'm going to head over to etc NGINX. Here are the files, and what I want to do is become root so that I don't have to type in sudo each time. So I'm going to do sudo su, and you can see right now that we changed from Bob to root. I'm going to clear the screen again. In this directory, there is a folder called sites available. So let's change directory into sites available. I'm going to clear again, list the files, and you could see the default configuration file. This is the configuration that is currently serving that default welcome to NGINX application. So let's go ahead and copy this file, and we will name it something like hello world. So let's go ahead and do copy default to hello world. Okay, just like that. And now if we display it, we can see the hello world here. So I'm going to clear the screen again, and I'm going to open up the hello world. And we're going to remove a lot of these comments. When you see a hash here, it's a comment. You can delete this. You can leave it there. I'm going to delete it so we can have a better view of the configuration we're going to create. I am going to remove all these blue ones right here. We don't need them. And in fact, I'm going to delete the IPv6 here. I'm going to head down here and remove all these comments in here and keep this as simple as possible. Delete all these ones right here. This gives you some examples right here. And here we go. So this is what I'm going to keep in here. Now, the first thing I want to do here is talk about the server name. At the moment, in our welcome to NGINX default, you could see here that this is empty. It has no server name. Now, when you want to host a website, you need to pass in the name of the website that will be serving this content. So in this example, we are going to do hello world, helloworld.com. And that means that whenever a request is being made to helloworld.com, NGINX will serve this content. It will look at the server name. It's actually a header that I'm going to go over in a little bit. It's the host header, and it'll match the helloworld.com with this configuration. The next thing we want to go over is the root directory here. This directive here tells NGINX where to look for the HTML, the JavaScript, CSS files. So the current directory right now is for that welcome to NGINX default. So we are going to change this, and we are going to call this, or we're going to rename this to hello world, and I'm just going to leave it like that. Now we are going to have to create this folder, but let's stick to the NGINX configuration first, and then we'll create the rest. So now when traffic is going to come in at helloworld.com, the first thing NGINX is going to do is it's going to try to read files from this root. And the first thing that it's actually going to try to do is read an index or index.html file. This defines the file that is to be used as the index when you land on the website helloworld.com. Something has to serve the front page, and that's where we're going to use our index.html page. Now, the rest of the things, you can leave it for now. We'll leave this as is. We will talk about this a little bit later, but I am happy with this configuration. I'm going to leave it as is, and I'm going to save my configuration. And now what we need to do is we need to create the directory that we just mentioned. So I'm going to head over to var www. I'm going to list the folders here. And this is the HTML folder that contains the default welcome to NGINX. Again, if we do curl localhost, you could see that configuration. Sorry, that content, this HTML. I clear again here. And what we want to do here is we want to create the same directory as we spelled it in our configuration. And that is going to be mkdir hello world. That's it. Now, if we list the folders here, now we have an HTML folder and we have a hello world. I'm going to go into the hello world, and it's empty. There's nothing in here, but remember that we need an index file here. So I'm going to just create a quick one. I'm going to use the touch command to create a file, index.html. And I'm going to go into this file, some basic HTML, and we're going to do hello world. We're going to close our HTML tag right here. I'm going to save this. And now we have If I go back up one directory, we have both the HTML, which is the default, welcome to NGINX, and now we have our hello world. Now, with that created, we can go back up to etc NGINX, etc NGINX, clear the screen again, do an LL, and the last piece right here that we have to do is create a symbolic link from sites available to sites enabled. So if we have a look at sites enabled, you will see here that this default is actually a link to etc NGINX sites available default. So we have to create the same for our hello page that we just did. So if we do sites available, you can see here that we have our default and we also have our hello world. So let me clear the screen again, and I'm going to go into sites available, list them, and now we can create our symbolic link. And this is the command ln, and we're going to pass in the -s for a symbolic, and we have to be specific of the whole path of where this is. There's the source and the destination. So I'm going to do etc NGINX sites available hello world, and it's going to go into etc NGINX sites enabled, just like that. I'm going to press enter. I'm going to go up one directory, and now I'm going to list the configurations in sites enabled. Sites enabled. And you can see now that we have our hello world, which is a symbolic link to the NGINX sites available hello world. Now, with that out of the way, the next thing we need to do is make sure that we check for any syntax errors or any errors at all. And that's where we can use the NGINX -t, of course, being for test. And it failed. It actually gives me something, and it says, hey, there's a duplicate default server in here. So we need to remove that line. I kind of forgot, but I'm glad that it happened, so you guys can see that you cannot use the same duplicate default server under two websites. So I'm going to go into sites available. I'm going to do hello world, and I'm going to remove this default server here and just leave it empty, right? And I'm going to save that. I'm going to rerun the test, and now we get our successful. So now that we configured our new hello world test page, and we created the folder, we ran the NGINX T to check for syntax errors. Now we can reload it. So we're going to do NGINX -s. This is a signal to reload. And that's done. So with that being done, I'm going to clear the screen. I'm going to exit the root account. I want to go back to being Bob. It's not really a good idea to continue using root for everything. So now what we can do is test NGINX again using the curl command. So we're going to do curl localhost. And I just want to show you what happens and how NGINX responds. So here we're going to get the welcome to NGINX default webpage. But how do we get the hello world? And that's where we use headers. Now, normally, what we would need to do is create a DNS record, right? When you go into something like google.com, for example, you don't remember the IP. You just remember google.com. Now, in our helloworld.com example, we would need to create a DNS record. It would need to propagate, and it could take a little while. But what we could do is we can use the curl command with some parameters to pass in the host headers. And I will show you what that looks like. So we are going to do curl, right? And we're going to do -- header. And in double quotes, we're going to do host : and we are going to do hello helloworld.com against the local host. And this, if it's set up correctly, should respond with our hello world page. So let's give it a shot. And there you go. We get the hello world. Again, this is a very basic response. This is not really the a real website, but just to show you how to set the server name in the NGINX configuration and also how to test it internally. Now, look what happens if I try to pass in a bogus DNS name. Let's do hello KodeKloud. And notice that NGINX still responds, but it's not responding with anything to do with hello KodeKloud, right? NGINX will serve the first available configuration when it cannot match. And what I mean by that is, I'm going to go ahead and clear this. Let's go into sites enabled, do an LL here. So if I go back to the command that I did, curl header host KodeKloud, what NGINX will do here is it's going to try to match this hello KodeKloud into one of these configurations. And if it cannot find one, it will serve the first one available alphabetically. So because there is no such thing in my configurations as hello KodeKloud, it's going to serve the default one. That's why in most cases, when you're setting up NGINX, you would most likely want to remove the default configuration. But again, NGINX will always serve the first available configuration alphabetically, and it will serve that configuration. So it's important that you set your server name correctly so that you don't run into these kinds of issues. So again, I'm going to fix it and do hello world.com. And now we get the hello world. Now notice that it has to be specific. It cannot be just hello world. It needs to be helloworld.com because that is what we configured it in the configuration file. So I'm going to clear again. Let's have a look at hello world. And this is the server name that we used. Now, there's one more thing here that we haven't done, and that is testing this from outside of the terminal. All this time we've been using curl, localhost, passing in headers, but now we need to test this what a client would see if they were to open up this in the browser. Now, at the moment, we cannot do that because we don't have a firewall enabled. You always want to have a firewall enabled. So on the next demo, I'm going to be going over the software firewall for Ubuntu and showing you how to open up a port so that you could serve the traffic to users. That's it for now. I'll see you guys in the next one.